Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you all for joining us now today. I hope we are going to have some insightful discussions on very different topics related to policy making, economics, and so on. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished guest, Ioannis Halikias, who has joined us today. So he had, let me a bit introduce him to you. So Ioannis Halikias has had a remarkable career, I would say, within the International Monetary Fund. And I hope his extensive experience in this field will also help us to have some very insightful conversations today. So we are going to basically have 4 presentations today on very different but very important and interesting topics. So let me also introduce to you our first presenter, so Miran Sisakian, who recently joined the Central Bank of Armenia here in Diligen. So over the last several days, he has been working on the U.S. neutral rates to try to approach that concept, how to think about the neutral rates, how to think about it, and so on. So he'll be sharing his ideas and perspectives on that matter, and then we'll start the discussion, asking him questions, and so on. So Miranjan, the floor is yours. So basically you will have, I think, maybe 20 minutes to present, but please be sharp. Imagine that you are like presenting all this stuff to a governor, like who is going to also like meet, let's say, like the managing deputy director of the IMF. So to be informed about all this stuff, but also like be brief and sharp on some important aspects. So the floor is yours, Miranjan, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for introducing. Now let me share my screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah, very good. Mr. Governor, it's my pleasure to introduce you my research on U.S. natural rate of interest, its uncertainties that we face now, and the approach that we should how we should approach to this problem to deal with the uncertainty that comes from the economy. Let me start. So I think you very well know about this topic, but I will quickly cover this to understand where this uncertainty comes from. And what we have seen during the recent years is the high inflationary environment in the US economy, which mostly came from the personal consumption expenditures increases, and which itself came from the accumulated savings during the COVID-19 pandemic due to fiscal stimulus measures. And after the pandemic, these accumulated savings have been translated into even more consumption than during the pre-COVID consumption levels, and increased aggregate demand significantly by also having significant pressures on the inflation. Why it is important to mention here, because what we try to do in the response of the Fed has been to aggressively responded to these inflationary pressures coming from the economy by increasing the monetary policy rate, and this increased it seems that it should have a significant preventing effect in the economy, and it should de-anchor the high inflation expectations in the economy, because as previously has been known, the natural rate of interest was around 2.5%, which is the nominal rate of neutral rate, which what is the neutral rate is when the economy works with full employment, with zero output gap, and when inflation is on the target. And it gives us why it is important to look at and know the neutral rate in the economy, because is the level above which we know whether our policy is contractionary and expansionary otherwise. And when when taking into account that pre-pandemic levels has been estimated to be at about 2.5% the neutral rate of interest, the current rate, which is around 5.5%, seems to be very high, and it should head to de-anchor the higher inflation expectations in the economy, break inflation back to its target. But both sticky price inflation and flexible inflation are still well above to this target, and the growth of the economy is also more than its average trend growth, which means that the interest rates that we have now is still not satisfying to bring the inflation back to its target. That's the main problem that comes when looking at the natural rate of interest and the uncertainty about where it is now. Now I will go deeper on what are the main determinant of the natural rate of interest in general, and particularly in the United States. The first thing, the main thing that is very perfectly correlated with the natural rate of interest is the potential growth of GDP, which, for example, if you have higher potential growth in your economy, it attracts both local and foreign investors, because now they have higher returns for their investments, which also increases the demand for loans, because not all of the investments are doing by their own monies. There also should be some kind of loan demand. By endogenous money creation, this loan demand increases also the deposit demand. Of course, all of this potential growth increases the income level in the economy, and some part of this income is also going into savings. But like in average, it is usually investments always when the growth comes from the potential growth, the investments always outweigh the savings levels, thus having positive impact on the natural rate of interest in the economy. But what determine the potential growth of GDP is the three main contributors, which are the total factor productivity, labor, and capital, each of them having their own kind of effects on the potential growth of GDP. If, for example, for why we are looking at this, because one way to estimate where our neutral rate is to look at some period of time in the data where economy works with full employment, with zero output gap, and when inflation is at the target, and to look at the interest rate at that particular period. And if this period is very recent period, we can take it on the neutral rate of the interest rate of that time as an approximate estimate of the neutral rate of current levels. But for example, if this period is long time ago, maybe 5 years, 10 years, and if during these periods there has been very significant fundamental changes in the real economy, which can come from total factor productivity, demographic, labor capital, or some other things. And we see how these fundamental changes would have an impact on the natural rate of interest for that period of time, knowing the natural interest of that particular period that we were observing. But why it is not a very good approach to deal with this problem? Because, for example, one factor that can contribute to the potential growth of GDP, which is for example, total factor productivity, is itself an observable variable, and there is no very perfect of course there is, but not very perfect deterministic relationship between total factor productivity and natural rate of interest. What we can observe here, I constructed a graph where you can see with red line the total factor productivity, the average growth rate, and the R star in the US starting from 1985. And I took the 5-year averages of each of these variables. And what we observed, there is almost perfect correlation between R star and growth. But in case of total factor productivity, we see some kind of perfect correlation only after the 2005, which means that even if it is a good determinant of R star, empirically it is not very good thing to just take as a, for example, one-to-one relationship and translate it into the R star. Another alternative measure that we can look at it is very commonly used estimates, even by Fed, the Laubach-Williams estimate of natural rate of interest and Lubick-Matters estimate.
Sorry, Mirhan, can I interrupt for a second just to clarify a bit? So I mean, the neutral rate there is nominal or real?
Which one? I'm talking
in your previous slide.
In the previous slide where it's the R star is it's the actually the real one. Is the real one.
It's the real one.
Yes.
And the growth is also real, right?
Let me see. I have prepared this slide several days ago. I need to also look at it. The growth levels is the yes, it's also the real growth.
So can you explain why the estimated natural rate, the neutral rate, is always substantially below the growth rate?
Yes, of course, because the you mean for this historical period, or
yeah.
Actually, it could be, it should be the opposite, yeah, because the average growth is around 2%, and the nominal R star is 2.5. When excluding the inflation target part from it, it should be 0.5. And here, if you just compare with each other the real nominal rate and the growth rate, that's the difference between it. We have a real growth of about on average like how it's in the recent period 2.5%, and the R star at around 1%. It's the estimate.
But if both rates both the growth and the neutral rate are expressed in real terms here, I mean, over long periods of time, at least.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you expect the real neutral rate to be roughly at the economy's potential growth rate?
I don't think so, because it will be if we will if both of them are real. It means that if you have 2% average growth, your neutral rate will be also 2%. Adding in it to inflation, 2% inflation target will be at around 4%, and with 4% nominal neutral rate, I don't think yet that you should have the growth levels that we have now.
Okay. Okay, I don't want to interrupt, because it's a bit puzzling, because I mean the real rate of return in an economy should be pretty much its long-term growth rate, right?
Yeah, if I may interrupt you,
yeah.
I don't know what Miran did here in details, but I guess what Ioannis means. I think that in the very long run, your neutral rate is like your marginal product of capital. So it is, which is also like, or like your productivity growth or your potential GDP growth. But maybe if we distinguish like this between like closed and open economies, so we will have some different implications in this regard, I think. So, for example, if if the economy is closed, I would agree that yes, that the neutral rate like is conceptually is your productivity growth, or in the long term it is your marginal product on capital. But when and the capital is also free, like to flow into the country and so on. Maybe there is also some different, for example, issues. For example, like like theories like global saving glut, like proposed by Ben Bernanke, so who told that there are lots of reserves accumulated in emerging countries.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a small open economy, yes, I mean, you're taking the global interest rate as given pretty much.
And you have like lots of capital inflowing to your country, which may affect your also your neutral rate.
Right, but this is for the US, isn't it? These estimates, or
yeah, it's for US.
I guess yes.
And US is pretty close. I mean, certainly it can affect its own interest rate, right? So yeah, I don't want to. It's something to keep in mind essentially when. I mean, to me, if I look at this chart, I may suspect that in estimating the natural rate, maybe you're underestimating potential growth. But please go on. I don't want to completely sidetrack you.
Yeah, actually, this estimates both for growth and R-star has been taken from the Fed, and it's their own estimates. I just took the averages of 5 years to isolate the structural shocks that will affect during the short-term periods to see the overall picture of it, to get smoother lines. Yeah, and I stopped when I was discussing about these two estimates, Laubach-Williams and Lubeck-Matters estimate. Actually, what we see here is that first I want to describe what are these two estimates and how they are different from each other. The Laubach-Williams estimate is based on simple state model and using the average growth trend and the household rate of time preferences as the determinants of the natural rate of interest, and using Kalman filter to approach to estimate the natural rate of interest. In contrast, Lubeck-Matters added here also the financial sector and used DSG models when trying to measure the same estimate. And these estimates, you can see that until the COVID-19, this estimate starting like from 2005, has been quite close to each other, like with simple differences, and these differences are not very crucial because we know the methodological difference that they measure it, and of course both of them cannot be considered as the precise measures of the natural rate of interest, because the economy cannot be described with very simple variables that they use. It's more general, and of course it has its own implications and usefulness. It has both its pros and cons. For example, when you see the Laubach-Williams estimate, it's mostly smooth, and during the recent years it has been decreased, but in contrast, Lubeck-Matters estimate has been increased because of the asset price increases and because Lubeck-Matters accounts for the financial sector, while the Laubach-Williams estimate doesn't account for it. And what is very uncertain here while you are looking at this graph, because almost during all the historical data, these two estimates went with the same direction, but during these recent years, these two estimates went in different directions, even confusing the policymakers whether the neutral rate has been increased or is decreased. The uncertainty, I'm showing this because the uncertainty also persists in the models. And the uncertainty also we have in the FOMC projections of the natural rate of interest. Of course, board of Fed board members are not providing exactly the natural rate of interest, but they provide their expectations about their longer run monetary policy rate, which can be a good proxy of the natural rate of interest, because in the long run, each board members try to bring the policy rate into close to the natural rate of interest. And this graph is created by me in R, where I took the data from June of each year with from their report of FOMC projections reports. And with the bubbles, you can see the number of votes that, for example, board members think that the natural rate or the long-run policy rate should be around here. And for example, starting from 2019, you can see that the main polarization is around 0.5%, and this persists up until the 2023, even the half of the 2023. If there is the distribution has been increased in 2023, but still the most of the part of the board members and market participants were thinking that the neutral rate is somewhere between 0.5, which is the real neutral rate. And but until from the June report of 2024, what we can see is that this polarization around the 0.5% doesn't exist anymore. The same polarization is around 1%, is around 1.5%, even higher. And this distribution, which this threshold shows the 50% distribution of their expectations, you can see that the uncertainty has been increased significantly, which gives us another part of uncertainty, that we have uncertainty in the models estimates, we have uncertainty inside the Fed, and we have also uncertainty around the economists, because for example, there was a very interesting debate by Laurie Summers and Olivier Blanchard talking about where the natural rate of interest is now, where it could be. And the arguments for both sides is very strong, and they can have endless discussion about this. Even if we start to discuss about this, it will be endless, because both arguments is very strong, and whether it is in almost previous threshold, or it has been increased significantly. For example, if I will briefly discuss what they think about it, is that, for example, Laurie Summers tells that if you have 0.5% real natural rate of interest plus 2% inflation target, so it will be around 2.5%, and that's the average number that Fed was thinking about that the natural rate should be. And you have 5.5% nominal interest rates. It means your policy is very, very tight, and you should see quickly the difference in the economy almost in all variables, both in the growth, in the aggregate demand, consumption, in also the inflation expectations. Of course, we see this, but it's not the so quick and so aggressive that the comparative increase in the policy rate, because if the difference is 3 percentage points, it should have its effect on the economy much bigger than we see now. Another point that Laurie Summers tells is that we further expect the increased expenditures by government. For example, in the military, military expenditures increases, the increased expenditures in green energy. Also, in addition to it, if Trump will be elected, it promises tax cuts, and all of these are making additional inflationary and pressures on the economy by increased aggregate demand in the economy, which will translate into higher inflation, and we should increase the policy rate even higher. And given the debt levels around 120% that we have now, from the opposite.
And I guess also in addition, if you have fiscal expansion, it's not only inflation expectations, it's also probably the equilibrium real interest rate will be higher, right?
Yeah, yes. But what Blanchard says, he says that there is no very fundamental economic changes during the recent years, and what we observe now is mostly cyclical shocks, and after some period of time the inflation expectations will bring into the target, and like the economy, like the neutral rate is almost on the same levels it has been before, because not very significant fundamental changes in the economy, and that the summer's expectations and estimations about the increased government spending on green energy or military expenses is overestimated, and it should not have the impact that Summers suggests. Of course, it's the brief interpretation about two different opinions on it. And why I'm telling this, so we have uncertainties everywhere, even inside of us, and what we need to do, we cannot come with the precise estimate, and instead of coming with baseline scenario to mentioning the precise estimate of the neutral rate of interest, we should approach to this with a new framework, with a new way, by prudent risk management, to understand and discuss different scenarios that could happen, and agree with both of them, telling that, like, okay, for example, the neutral rate is now higher. For example, it is around 4%, nominal one is around 4%, and we implement policy according to that assumption, and then it appears that actually the neutral rate was in the previous levels, and Blanchard is right. And what will be our costs at that moment? We should keep the interest rates higher because neutral is high. We should keep interest rates higher for bringing inflation expectations back to its target, and to anchor the higher inflation expectations, and then it will appear that actually the neutral rate is, for example, 2.5%, which means our policy is very tight, and the fear that we have that there is an asset bubble in the economy, it's a fear. It means that we would also maybe have the wise scenario where there can be very big deflationary pressures on the economy, and you have kept your interest rates quite high, and there is a risk of hitting the effective lower bound with the and if you think that the fiscal policy will come and help us, it will be naive, because of the for example, the budget deficit is also almost at 8% levels, which almost not gives them an opportunity to implement expansionary fiscal policy if this scenario will happen. From the opposite side, for example, if you take into account that the neutral rate is around 2.5% and we start to decrease our policy rate, it means that maybe as a lot of indicators still shows that the wars against inflation is still not over. It means we should have even higher inflation, and then we should increase our interest rates even more aggressively to deal with this kind of problems. I am briefly discussing the way that we should approach to this problem with scenario building, with discussing from the prudent risk management approach, understanding the costs of each policy that we should implement and do the least regret policy for us. And also, I have another task to very quickly in the 1-2 minutes discuss it, the implications for the small open economy of my findings. For example, I took the Armenia, and this again I created myself. What I did, for example, for understanding the neutral rate of Armenia, what you have to do is to took the country which whose bonds are most risk-free bonds, and from which you can calculate by adding your country risk premium, and also, for example, subtracting your real effective exchange rate growth trend, and also like if you want to get the nominal one, plus adding the nominal inflation target in your economy. So with this kind of equation, getting the rate in estimated neutral rate for Armenia. Of course, as we know, I took the natural rate of interest of the United States by Laubach, Williams, and Lubeck Mateus, which are, I already discussed, is not very precise measures, but there is uncertainty threshold in there, and I took one of them as the lower threshold and lower board, and the next one is as the upper bound, and also added here the real exchange rate uncertainty that for Armenia we had that observation research before, including all of these uncertainties. I constructed the natural rate estimate for Armenia with the threshold that you see here, which again shows, for example, with lighter gray threshold, you will see the US natural rate interest rate uncertainty that comes from US, and that it has been significantly increased during the several years, and also some other implications about real effective exchange rate uncertainty. Of course, it's not the best way to approach to this problem, because both US natural rate of interest is unobservable, real effective exchange rate of Armenia is unobservable, country risk premium that we are adding is also unobservable. So lots of things are just have been constructed under different assumptions, and more rigorous and more further research needed to be done to approximate to get the approximate measure of the natural rate of interest for Armenia. Thank you so much. That's everything that I have prepared today for you. If you have any questions, I'm open for it.
Thanks, Miran John. So I would make just one comment. So Miran said it several times that, so I don't know, the Laubach-Williams estimate or Lubeck-Mateus or any other estimate. So referring to him saying that those are not very precise estimates or something like that. But I would say that not any like specific number or any specific point would be precise talking about the neutral interest rate. And anytime you tell one just like a precise number, anyone can attack you, and I would say that you couldn't justify that number, but rather I would say that when you was talking about the Fed projections, so Fed for FOMC members estimates about the neutral rates, what was interesting for me is about the thinking. So if we look into the history, so they were more or less consistent with the Blanchard's views about the neutral rates. So it is also not about a specific point. It is about it is a thinking, how to think about the neutral rates. So the Blanchard and Summers debate is about like how to think about the neutral rates, whether they are too low or whether they are like high. I don't know whether they are 0 or 0.5 or they are like 1.5 or 2 or 2.5 or somewhere like that. So before the pandemic or before the tightening cycle started in the US, so we see that the FOMC members were mainly like in the thinking of the Olivier Blanchard, while we see now that some of them, or at least we see some like two patterns, that some of them thinks that the neutral rates might be much higher than what they were thinking about.
I mean, this ties in also. This makes sense also in light of Powell's recent speech, right, where he essentially said we were wrong, right? We were thinking that inflation was very transitory at first, but we changed our mind. I mean, we saw that we needed to tighten in order to bring inflation back.
Yeah, sure. So thanks once more, Miranjan. If anyone has any other comments or questions regarding this presentation, please. If not, thanks once again. And we are moving to the next presenter, who is Tina Antkuladze from the National Bank of Georgia. So she has also recently joined the MBG team and the GFS team. So please warmly welcome her to our meeting. So Tina, so she will be also talking about the neutral rates, the US neutral rates, and specifically how the FPAS Mark II framework could help, for example, the Fed to handle that issue better. So Tina, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Vasco, for the introduction. Thank you, Governor Ioannis, for being here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So my presentation, oh, sorry, can you see change? Oh, superb. So my presentation will be less technical than whatever Mihran's presentation was, which was very comprehensive. I'll structure it such that we understand the main issues related to identifying the neutral rate in the United States and how FPAS Mark II framework could be of aid and could relieve the pressures on the policymaker. The first thing that I want to point out, Governor, is that in the literature, we often come across the terms of natural rate versus the neutral rate. So the usually natural rate is denoted by R bar, which is the flexible price equilibrium short-run real interest rate, and neutral rate is denoted by R star, which is the real rate at which monetary policy switches from being accommodative to neutral. So, and there are multiple definitions of them, but the idea behind them is the same. They are very important variables for the central bank to have in mind. And it is important to have in mind because if the policy that a central bank is bringing in is lower than the neutral rate, if the policy rate is lower than the neutral rate, then there is a risk of getting stuck in a high inflation trap. And if it is higher, there is a risk of getting stuck in a low inflation trap. And we had periods in USA of being stuck in a high inflation trap in 70s, from 73 to 81 approximately, which was very hard on the economy. We also have some examples of developed economies being stuck in a low inflation trap, such as Japan, and it hasn't come out of it for decades, and also the ECB and the problems that come with having a zero lower bound. So having it in mind is very important. But the issue about identifying natural or neutral rates, as Mihran talked about it, is that it's unobservable, it is extremely complex, and we need many, many assumptions. So to think that there is one deterministic model that can give you a specific point, like Vascan pointed it out, is very wrong. You cannot possibly imagine that you have all the theory down, you have all the variables incorporated in a model that can give you a result. And then with that comes many misconceptions about natural and neutral rates. First is that prevailing models, VAERs, and also models that look at asset prices think that the neutral rate can be determined deterministically, like we can get a number. Second issue is what Claudio Borio is a huge advocate of is that there is no neutral rate. Neutral rate is even controlled by the policy that the central bank sets. And the third issue is what Jerome Powell mentioned several times, that having neutral rate in mind doesn't really get you anywhere. It just is a distraction. And he has mentioned, for example, in June of 2024 and also in April, that they don't really look at the neutral rate. And I'll address this issue separately. So first is issues with models, and which we can see graphically just by looking at them. So there are several models. There are 4 main models that are the most important and prevalent in academia and in policymaking. There are VARs, like Lubbock-Martens. There is also a model which is an overlapping generations model, which is more, informative because it talks more about what variables are in play. The DSG models. There is also Laubach and Williams' semi-structural models, which has a blend of time series, asset pricing, and semi-structural approaches. Then we also have the Amico, Kim, and Y models, which are looking at long-run interest rates from a bond pricing market. And then all of these have multiple assumptions because they are looking at a lot of unobservables. And as we can see, the results are in stark difference across history, I would say, and especially right now. The results that they give are hugely different, which is one very evidence. It's silly construction of words, but you get what I mean. So it's very evident and palpable that these models cannot possibly claim that they have a neutral rate pinned down, and as all of them give very different results. And I won't go into technicality of it, but just by looking at it, we know that it cannot be determined deterministically. In OLG models, another issue is that they look at a lot of domestic variables which are unobservable, such as total factor productivity growth, labor input growth, population growth, higher government debt to GDP ratio, increased longevity, rising inequality. I won't go for example, productivity growth would entail higher interest rates, labor input growth would also, and so would population growth. But then increased longevity would mean that would have a downward pressure on the neutral rate, and so would the rising inequality, because rising inequality would mean that people with higher wealth have even more wealth, and they are more prone to making more savings. And using the ISLM reasoning, it would put a downward pressure on the neutral rate. And all of it are quite straightforward. And an economist should obviously have all these driving mechanisms in mind when thinking about it, but putting it in a model and thinking that it will give you a good result is not a sustainable way of thinking, because and I'll talk more about it later, because one is that most of the models, and I would say all of the models, disregard the effect coming from having integrated capital markets. And just by looking at a Metzler, Metzler model, which all of us have studied on a BA level in international trade, thinking that autarky rate is sustainable is wrong. A country who has a higher autarky interest rate compared to other like US and Japan, US runs a deficit and Japan runs a surplus, and there is a whole thing of carry trade where people make benefit of it, and there is a huge co-movement among real interest long-term rates between countries, as we saw the example of carry trade a couple of weeks ago when Japan had an interest rate hike and yen's appreciation. It had quite a significant impact on the US's asset markets. But then again, you can't say that that there is a perfect capital mobility or perfect asset market arbitrage. We don't even know how large the carry trade is. Some say that it's 500 billion, some say that it's 4 trillion. So it's a huge range. And thinking that we can just put it in a model, there is a perfect capital mobility, it is also wrong. So where I'm getting on with it, I'm saying it's impossible to find out, but I think that if if you're an economist who has it as an instinct to link many driving factors, and like Ioannis, Vasgen, and Doug are far superior compared to me, that's why huge experience and being a critical thinker is very important, because like that you can have judgment. For example, we can put judgment on what we see on US's market. There is a huge drop on SOFR path from 4.9 to 4.2 just over in a 2-month period, which I think is not sustainable. There is also a huge expectations of a 50 basis point cut. Again, I don't think is unsustainable. When we look at the BAA market, BAA spread, we see that it has not gone up. It has not crossed the 2% mark, which you can see there as a line. And this 2% mark is usually an indicative of we are going into a recession. And we don't see it yet. There is no substantial reason coming from financial markets to think that. There is also not a necessarily substantial reason to think that there is a need for a huge cut, looking at inflation, as Mihran explained, or looking at the labor market, which I have explained before. I'll go deep into it. There is also a risk of having a huge asset price bubble, because there was an immense increase in household wealth from the period of increased savings starting in pandemic. There was, and according to the great equation that Mariam and Doug pinned down, which states that consumer wealth, like household wealth, is a great determinant of consumption. Like based on that, and based that people have so much wealth accumulated, and given that they can put this wealth as a collateral, and which is often an indicator of an upcoming global financial crisis, again, I don't think that it's sustainable to think that we need to have a huge rate cut. Maybe a rate cut, but not a 50 basis points. And so it is important to think about variables which could proxy a neutral rate, like the very simple reasoning which I provided here for the US's market. And sometimes the solution that economists bring when they're faced with a problem of a unicorn and an observable like a neutral rate is to assume that it should be disregarded, as I mentioned previously about what Claudio Borio states and what Jerome Powell has pointed to several times. But I don't think Fed disregards it at all. I think it was just a communication that they had then, that they are not looking at the neutral rate, but I think they have all the scenarios pinned down. I think they're doing an amazing analysis. They just don't necessarily communicate it like FPAS Mark II suggests. And the issue with the implications of such reasoning that a policymaker must not look at neutral rate is very detrimental to policymaking. As Lawrence Summers says, it's like driving a car on fuel without looking at a speedometer. And it has another implication of Fed being inclined to be very fiddle to forward guidance. So if they said that they will cut the rates, they must stick to it. But then it brings the issue of falling behind the curve, which is a huge problem, and it entails huge welfare losses to people, because if you fall behind the curve, then you need to cut the rate too much or increase the rate far too much. And this is why Lawrence Summers, economists like Lawrence Summers, Doug Laxton, and Ioannis and everyone at GFS states that they should have an idea of what a neutral rate is, because without it, it's like if you don't have it in mind, then what does your rate increase or rate decrease mean? So having it in mind and doing a current analysis is very important. Another huge going off the trail when it comes to unobservables like neutral rate is what Claudio Borio states. He says that we cannot see the unobservable of neutral rate, and the best guess that we can have is that the policy controls it, and the monetary policy controls the real interest rate, which is a huge risk of if an economist thinks like that, and if people believe that, it has huge negative implications on monetary policy. And because it's a huge oversimplification, if you look at monetary policy like that, then you disregard the important aspect of macroprudential controlling. Like if you do not look at if you think that I'm going to set the policy rate, it will be the real interest rate, then you won't look at people overly increasing their credits. You won't look at banks overly supplying the loans and in risky assets. And this is what will put you into financial instability, not the policy rate. And what FPAS Mark II suggests is that you should definitely not disregard potential neutral rate, because without it, policy action doesn't make sense. You should not rely on model output because it cannot be determined deterministically. You cannot expect supply side shocks, you cannot put it in the model, you cannot predict changes in capital markets necessarily because it is very complex. So what you should do is what has been suggested in recommendations. I forgot the name, it's embarrassing. So what you should do is that you should act like a seasoned PhD and draw an intricate picture by economic reasoning, like an F1 driver who drives at a limit. If F1 driver doesn't have a stochastic nonlinear optimal control equations in his mind when he makes a turn in a corner, he thinks about it instinctively. So you should have your instincts of where the neutral rate is. And it's not just about an instinct. You should also be clear about where your instinct comes from. You should provide a transparent communication. And the whole idea of FPAS Mark II is that, yes, probably you're making a mistake, but what you should do is whatever Fed already does internally, but communicate it. And if you see that your assumptions were wrong, it will be evident in implications. And as soon as you see that, oh, we made a mistake, you are no longer dependent on the forward guidance that Fed has now of a single baseline projection. And you can say, well, it was communicated that we were also thinking of a separate scenario, and we are there. And we're going to act on it very swiftly, and we won't fall behind the curve and reduce welfare of people substantially, like we've seen many, many times. And now about what should a small open dollarized economy like Georgia do. So there is a huge asymmetricity of risk. There is an inflation exchange rate monetary policy nexus, as Doug likes to say, and it's a perfect way of describing it because Georgia's monetary policy is not like US's. Georgia should look at US neutral rate as a proxy for global interest rate, and then maybe through a UIP reasoning, there are also other models, but say from UIP reasoning, it should think about, are we lower than the US's neutral rate? Then there is a huge risk of depreciation. It will hit our credibility. The dollarization aspect will come in. People will sell their lari for dollar, and it will be a huge hit on policymakers' ability to control their markets. And US's policy rate will basically be running your economy, which is very different from US economy, and it will be horrible. So you need to keep the inflation expectations in mind. You should keep the exchange rate in mind. Will it be depreciated? And there are many uncertainties. But again, it should still act as Fed acts in terms of communicating the different scenarios, being transparent, and if their assumptions are wrong, they should act swiftly. So FPAS also works in that case as well. So that was my short overview of what I think of neutral rate. Thank you very much. This is the list. I've gone over time. I'm very happy.
Okay, thanks.
No, perfect. Thanks, Tina. That was very, very, very nicely done.
Yeah, I was also really enjoying that.
Can I ask you something about? I understand all the limitations of models and how you need to apply judgment and everything. But it's nice to be able to think, at least to use models as an input and of course apply judgment to them.
Yeah.
Now we have, as also Miran indicated before in your charts, I mean, different models give us different results, but it seems that in the most recent period, they also go in the opposite way. So you have the VAR based going one way and the Kalman filter based estimates going the opposite way. So yeah, I think it should be important also in order to base our judgment somewhere to understand what the pros and cons of different approaches are, and what are more likely to be relevant in the current period, in the post-pandemic, let's say, period. Could you elaborate a bit into that? How would you evaluate, I mean, what in the current circumstances, what would be the more reasonable guide essentially to policy between these two, for example?
Okay, I'm going to give a very layman answer because I cannot claim that I've gone through models and tried them, like I haven't worked on them. But as an FPAS Mark II student, I'm going to say that I'm going to look at both models. I'm going to look at the current analysis that I've provided, and I'm going to put my judgment on what model makes sense. And then, given the merits of FPAS Mark II, a policymaker can communicate, like these models give that, they have these assumptions, they shouldn't talk about models, but like you know, like these assumptions give us that, these assumptions give us that. And if the result, like Jerome Powell also has mentioned it, we know the neutral rate once we've seen how the inflation and unemployment have reacted to the policy rate that we've set. And if we see that the policy rate that we've set is wrong and it didn't give us the result that it has given us, we can change the policy stance rather swiftly compared to what FPAS Mark I central banks can do. So what I would do is that I would put my judgment on it the best that I can and then communicate both. And then we might be in an ABX scenario or AB scenario, and we'll see from implications of the policy that we've implemented. It was a very layman's answer because I don't know.
No, it's a reasonable answer. I think, though, it may make some sense also to dig a bit deeper into the underlying assumptions.
Yes, absolutely.
Underlying the two models and try to see, first of all, why they deviate and what types of assumptions may be more relevant in the current circumstances in order to essentially, you're never going to be guided by a model. There is always uncertainty. And central banks actually historically know there is uncertainty, right? And one way that they deal with that is that they adjust policy gradually, right? You don't have 50 or 75 basis points changes in interest rates very, very often. Usually they go much softer, trying to test where the neutral rate is, where the full employment is. They're trying to see what by essentially trial and error, which makes some sense. And also there is history dependence embedded in policy decisions, again, to deal with this type of uncertainty. But I thought your responses and your analysis, to me at least, they make perfect sense. I found them very sensible.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And yes, so huge variation in policy rate would of course harm the credibility of a central bank policymaker, but FPAS Mark II's communication would improve the aspect of forward guidance and dependence on forward guidance significantly. Yeah, so I should have made it clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Tinajan, once more. So that was a really nice presentation. I also enjoyed that too much. But I also want to ask just one question. Maybe if Ioannis can also comment on that question, that would be perfect, so that I understand that so also his views. So you said that, commenting on Jerome Powell's speech on the neutral rates, like Larry Summers said, that not like doing the monetary policy without knowing where the neutral rates might be is kind of like driving a car on a field without looking on an accelerator, no? But what I came to, that was a very nice analogy, but what I wanted to ask you, so what do you think? Like, because I also kind of think that the neutral rate is kind of a feeling, not an exact number. So because like when you are driving a car, and when you have some kind of large or extensive experience driving a car, in any particular moment, you feel whether you are driving too fast or not too fast. So just in case of the neutral rate, it is like very time-depending variable and very uncertain, as you said. And being a very good economist and having very much experience in policy making, you have to, like doing the monetary policy, feeling like the economy, you have to understand whether you are driving too fast or there is like a lot of room to still accelerate the pace. So what I wanted to ask, whether do you think that it is kind of a feeling that you have to drive the car and understand while driving whether you are driving too fast or not, or you think that you have to come up with some measure even before like switching on the car? I understand that may be a very complicated question for Tina, and so that might be your view or opinion on that. And also Yanis would like, if he also replies, that would be nice.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Yanis's take on it as well. But I'll say what I tried to communicate through my presentation was that I quoted Summers in a sense that it would be better. The way I understood what he said was that, of course, you should drive by a feel, but a speedometer is a useful tool. So if you have it, it just improves your performance significantly. For example, it depends on a car. Like if you are driving a fast car for the first time, you might not know, like, are you going fast because you don't feel the speed. And the economy that the US is right now, the pandemic economy, they don't really know what pandemic economy feels like because it's so novel. We haven't been there before. So if you have a speedometer, it helps. But the default, like the example which I brought about F1 driver, you should definitely have a good feel of your car. You shouldn't be dependent on very hard mathematics and equations and models, but models are useful, obviously. So, Yanis, what's your take? I'm curious.
I'm a bit at disadvantage here because probably compared to you, I'm a rather inexperienced driver, so I don't have a good sense of the analogy there. Well, I mean, the speedometer thing is, I mean, if you had a speedometer, it would be great, right? The problem is that you don't have a speedometer as far as the natural rate is concerned. You don't know what the natural rate is. At least the speedometer, if it works properly, will tell you exactly what your speed is. And on the other hand, I would not trust feeling entirely, because in practice, I mean, back to the car analogy, even Formula One drivers crash from time to time, so it's not always a foolproof type of approach. And in fact, more prosaically, I mean, the profession and the central bank community is often plagued by groupthink, where they may be misled in major ways. Looking back at the post-COVID experience, for example, in a retrospect, advanced country central banks, in my view, clearly were behind the curve. They did not respond as early as they should have to the inflationary pressures. In fact, some of the more successful inflation targeting emerging market central banks did much better. They realized that they would need to tighten, and they did tighten substantially much earlier, and the outcomes were better for them. Now, I mean, at the risk of oversimplification, what I would say is that it's useful to look at models, look at what models tell you. It's important to understand what are the assumptions underlying these models in order to understand which I mean, it's not that a model is generally better than another, but you could identify cases where, in the current circumstances, for example, the assumptions driving model A may be more reliable than those driving model B, may be more relevant in a sense, or the limitations of one model may be more pronounced under different circumstances. And this could give you at least a rough idea on the direction towards which you should be going, not necessarily take their numerical estimates as a given. And in that sense, if you have a reasonably judgment-based but also model referring sense of which direction you'll be going, I think it makes usually much more sense to proceed gradually, right? To test, and in doing so, essentially, you look how each policy move, after each policy move, how the economy responds, and you have a wide variety of indicators to tell you, okay, is this enough? Do I need to go more? I would avoid, except in crisis circumstances, I would avoid very large moves in interest rates, which would turn out to be quite destabilizing for the economy as a whole. I mean, that would be, it's not a very scientific response, but that would be my general approach on how to deal with all this uncertainty in these estimates.
Okay, thanks, Yannis. I would say, like, your accelerator, your speedometer in this case is your like dashboard of economic indicators. So you are driving the car, like looking at your dashboard and like understanding at any moment whether you are driving too fast or not, kind of like this. But thank you again, Tinajan and Ioannis, for this very insightful discussion. And let's move on to the next presenter. So please meet.
Vaccine, could I ask? I need to make a very quick phone call. Could I step away for 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back. Thanks.
Okay. So please meet Svetlana Sagrian from the Central Bank of Armenia. So she will be talking about the non-traded sticky price indices for the UK and like long-term inflation expectations. And so, Svetajan, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and as Pascal said, I will talk about the non-traded sticky price inflation in the United Kingdom, and also we will look at the long-term inflation expectation. So, as in our previous live streaming, I was talking about this non-traded sticky price inflation for the UK. I just don't want to go deeper into that part again, so I will start, I think, with the remembering about the Ben Bernanke's review of the Bank of England's monetary policy framework, and also then we can switch to the long-term inflation expectations and compare with the non-traded sticky price inflation. So I just want to say that as we are at the Global Forecasting School, and at the same time we are working at the Central Bank of Armenia, and as we have this FPAS Mark II framework, we just understand the importance of FPAS Mark II framework. And based on the Ben Bernanke's review, the idea was the same, that he also suggested the framework which is in line with our FPAS Mark II framework. And we know that every central bank, especially in this FPAS Mark II framework, has to have the answers for 2 main questions. So I just want to mention here that the UK is non-FPAS central bank, but as we are now dealing in the FPAS Mark II framework in the central bank, so we have to look at the this side, the FPAS Mark II framework side, to the United Kingdom as well. So As I said, every central bank in the FPAS Mark II and FPAS framework has to have the answers for three main questions. Where is the economy now? What are the underlying forces driving the current economic trends? And how should we adjust our policy instruments to achieve our primary objectives? So to address these questions effectively, there is a need to have some reliable measures of underlying inflation, and typically central banks use underlying inflation measures to track price dynamics and determine when there is a need for policy intervention. And Bernanke's review commissioned following widespread criticism of the Bank of England's failure to anticipate the sharp rise in inflation post-pandemic, and emphasizes the important role that accurate and well-communicated forecast play in guiding monetary policy. And the review was presented as a one-in-generation opportunity to refine the United Kingdom's framework for monetary policy, a framework that has largely remained unchanged since its establishment in 1997. So let's switch to the points that Bernanke mentioned in the review. Bernanke's assessment in both thorough and also at times brutally honest. So he didn't shy away from highlighting the significant shortcoming the bank's economic modeling. And his 75-page document critiques the bank's over-reliance on outdated software and also inefficient deployment on highly skilled staff, and noting that these issues have contributed to some complicated and also some unwieldy system. And Bernanke stressed that these inefficiencies often required staff to use human judgments to paper over problems with the models, which ultimately delayed the bank's ability to detect structural changes in the economy, such as shift in labor market, productivity, and the interaction between wages and prices. And one of the most striking aspects of Bernanke's review is his critique of the bank's material underinvestment in its forecasting tool. So he described the bank's forecasting infrastructure as relying on these makeshift fixes that are not sustainable in the long run. And this critique underscores the need for significant overhaul of the bank's forecasting tool and processes. And Bernanke urged the bank to pay closer attention to labor market dynamics, productivity areas where the current model have fallen short. And Bernanke offered detailed prescription for addressing these shortcomings. So he recommended that the Bank of England significantly invest in its forecasting infrastructure, embracing more advanced modeling techniques and also incorporating some wider range of data sources. And by modernizing its tools and methods, the bank can better anticipate and also respond to economic shocks and uncertainties, which are crucial in today's volatile global economy. And in addition to technical improvements, in the report, Bernanke emphasized the importance of enhancing the bank's transparency. So he called for more detailed explanation of the models and assumptions underpinning the forecast, and this increased transparency would not only boost the credibility of the bank's forecast, but also will help external analysts and also the public understand the rationale behind the monetary policy decision. And interestingly, Bernanke also refrained from addressing one of the most debated issues among some economists, whether the Bank of England should begin publishing its own projections of future interest rates. And this omission was some notable, as much move could bring the United Kingdom's practices in line with those of other central banks, as Fed has its dot plots to show official rate projections. And Bernanke acknowledged that while this would be a highly consequential change, but it is a decision that should be left for future deliberations. And he described this potential shift as some aggressive approach, one that could fundamentally alter the bank's communication strategy. And In the central bank, we know that there is a need for forecasts come solely from using them for policy formulation. So when you formulate policy, helps you to make decision because your decision affect the future. And also an important thing in the central banking sphere is that you need to have some idea about the future. And communication, as also said, is one of the key part of the Bernanke's review, and he urged the Monetary Policy Committee to move away from its heavy reliance on the central economic forecast as primary communication tool, and instead he recommended the Monetary Policy Committee regularly publish some range of alternative scenarios. As we have here in the FPAS Mark II framework and also in this Central Bank of Armenia, and this approach would not only help in comparing different policy options, but also in learning from past mistakes and also thus improving the clarity and also effectiveness of communication with the public and markets. And Bernanke also argued that relying too heavily on a single central forecast, particularly one based on market expectation of future interest rates, could be misleading. And he noted that there are instances where the committee might believe that market rates are too high, yet the central forecast would suggest otherwise, leading to some disconnect between the bank's communication and its true policy stance. And what I want to show you here is that we have like long-term inflation expectations for the United Kingdom and with the non-tradistic price inflation. So what this graph tell us, so we can see that somehow as Bank of England has a 2% target for the inflation rate, we can see that their 5-year expectation and also the 10-year break-even inflation rate is also above their 2% target, which telling us that and this is like starting from 2001, and we can see that yes, during the periods of the global forecast crisis, and there was some increase in the expectations for the future inflation rate. There is some hikes in these expectations, but we can see that when we look at the other data sets, for now we can see that it somehow tries to decrease, but we can see that all these trend shows that they are above their 2% target. And I also don't have the chart for the US, but I want to mention here that when we're comparing it with the US case, when we looking at the sticky prices for the US and also this 5-year expectations for the US, we can see that they are now are anchored to their 2% target. What we have here, we have that our non-tradistic price inflation continues to decrease, but it's like above this 2% target, and also it's above than their headline and core inflation. So looking at this graph, it's like telling us that Bernanke is telling us a story that we need to look, the Bank of England need to look at the Bernanke's review, and they need to have a framework that we have in the Central Bank of Armenia. They need to have some framework, they need to have some alternative scenarios, and also they need to have high level of transparency, and they need to have a high level of credibility to not have these anchored inflation expectations. So I think this is all for now, and for next seminars, I will introduce also the Israel case, and now I'm constructing this non-tradistic price inflation measure for the Israel, and that's all for the UK today. So thank you.
Thanks, Svetajan. Any questions? from the audience?
I have a very quick question. It is a bit of a puzzle. I mean, if you look at the history of the UK, certainly the current situation is clearly unsatisfactory. I mean, both actual inflation and inflation expectations have deviated a lot. But if you look at the history, there were long periods, right? First of all, expectations seem to have been permanently unanchored, right? They seem to be throughout the period you're showing here, they seem to be substantially above the target. On the other hand, actual inflation for long periods was relatively close to the target, right? If you look, I guess, since the global financial crisis and roughly until the pandemic, right? The Bank of England managed to keep actual inflation close to its target, even though expectations were constantly above. How do we account for that? I know it's not an easy question, but it's kind of a puzzling picture, right? You would think that expectations should have some predictive power, at least for actual inflation, but it seems that they didn't here.
Okay, I just want to say that when we look at their medium-term inflation expectations for the previous time, I just showed you the chart. So when we look at the medium-term inflation expectation, we can see that they are just closing to the target. But when we look at these long-term inflation expectations, so we can see that they are disanchored, unanchored, and I think the only thing that we need when we're looking at this graph and when we're looking at there some developments in the economy, we just can say that there is a need to have transparency, and I just think that they need to increase their communication strategy, and they need to increase their transparency, and having different type of reports on these developments in the economy and etc. I think they can help this can help them to give trust from the public, and I think the only thing is here that as Ben Bernanke's report, we can say there is a need to have another monetary policy framework here.
Okay, so I guess what Ioannis's question was about, why he was puzzled there, is that even though we had, for example, a long period of stable and on the target inflation, and the inflation was on the target, like after the global financial crisis and up to the pandemic. So even during that time, the break-even inflation expectations were much higher than the inflation target. Yeah, that is also a bit that's a bit strange and puzzling. And so there was also this kind of an issue regarding the Bank of Russia, but in their case, the story was a bit different because their inflation expectations were kind of survey-based ones. So even when the inflation was on the target for a very long time, so for Russia, that very long time, maybe just 1 year or even less. So, but survey-based inflation expectations were higher even than 10%. So they were communicating that, that 10% is consistent with our target. So when the survey-based inflation expectations are 10% or close to 10%, it means that we understand that they are like relatively on the target. So, but in these cases, these are not like survey-based, rather than like this is like we get it from the actual like options markets and so on. So it is also puzzling to me. But I also want to ask a question on this, whether, so if we look at really on the start of the history, so in early like 2000s, we see some periods that when these inflation expectations were roughly like on the target. So I'm curious whether there were some maybe institutional changes in the Bank of England or in England at all that like drove the inflation expectations systematically higher than the target, or I don't know. Do you remember any, I don't know, any event or any institutional change or something like that?
So for now, no, I don't remember something that can helps to get the answer to this puzzle. But I think I will look deeply on this part and I will try to get the answer. So like, yeah, this is the interesting one.
Because maybe at some point, like markets lose, how to say, like started not to believe on the independence in some sense of this on the Bank of England or something like that. So maybe that might also cause some problems there. Okay, thanks, Sveta-Jen. If there is no other comments or questions, or let's then move to the last part of today's discussion seminar. So please meet Diana, who has been working for the Central Bank of Armenia 12 years. So Diana-Jan, the floor is yours. So please. So she's going to talk about the non-traded sticky prices for the euro area. And I think that's also a very interesting topic to have today. So Diana-Jan, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Vasgen-Jan, for a nice presentation. And also thank you, Svetlana, for opening the floor of discussions about non-traded sticky price inflation. Let me share my presentation. I hope you can see it. Just let me share it like this. Maybe it will be better. So, and I can change the slides. So once again, I'm Diana. I'm GFA student, and today I'm going to talk about non-traded sticky price inflation applied for the euro area. As you know, I presented it last time that we were highly inspired from the Atlanta Fed's different measures of underlying inflations, and we come up the idea that the exchange rate and also the flexible part of the basket somehow can be take away to thinking about the behavioral changes of the consumers and of course price setters to understand what's going on, especially during high uncertainty times. And of course you can see here that the Fed had a nice underlying inflation measure, sticky price inflation, and we come up with this idea to de-risk this part and as I mentioned, to check the behavioral changes from the consumption basket. So let me briefly say that even ECB had different underlying measures, they don't have the one that can give policy makers the understanding of the policy making stance. And even I showed this graph, this slide beforehand. I want to briefly say that it's covered about the 50% of the basket, and it's mainly take the part of the housing, health, personal care, transport, communication, recreation, and some services from the clothes and footwear. I also want to emphasize that the classical example that we usually bring is the hairdressers services prices, and we want to highlight here that if your hairdresser wants to change the prices, it must be driven with some economic changes, with some behavioral changes, or it exists some pressures that is coming from excess demand. So that's why we want to find out what can give us this non-traded sticky price inflation measure for different country cases. And of course, at this part, I want to cover the euro area. You can easily see that the red line is the non-traded sticky price inflation, which is much smoother than the headline. And of course, during the less uncertain time, I think it's smoother, and maybe it couldn't have some additional information. But during the shocks, we need to identify how it changed and what it can give us. Example is the COVID crisis, and you can see here that even the core inflation was below the target. It was even close to their average rate during last 10 years. The non-traded sticky prices started to rise, and of course it gave some signal that ECB missed. And because ECB is not a central bank, for them is harder to understand where is the economy now and what are the underlying forces. And we are not talking about the third part of these ingredients, how they can deal with policy rates. So they miss the current analysis part, they miss this trigger, and of course what we have, they delayed their policy rate increase. So you can see here that it's delayed with its decision. Even their inflation were mainly driven by this energy crisis. They started with the one-time shock, which is of course out of core, and maybe ECB could communicate that it's out of core, and we can just wait, and they rely on their credibility as well. But they missed this acceleration in the market expectations, and they missed this behavioral changes part. Because in this case, let me also say that they misunderstand the difference between the acceleration of their inflation against the US, because US had this strong consumption-driven story behind their persistently high inflation, but ECB had mainly credibility loss and market expectation changes here. So my question here, is it enough just to have the non-traded sticky price inflation for analyzing any economy? Of course not. And we dive deeper to understand what can else to be needed to build our story here. And let me say that we come up the results that maybe was triggered by ECB's delayed action. And the first one was the aggressive rate hike, because maybe in other cases they can even survive with less and with smoother increasing path for their policy rates, but of course they had this aggressive rate hike. And of course, we had seen this economic slowdown started at the second half of the 2023, and you can see that it was mainly driven by the domestic absorption, which means consumption goes down, and of course, investment went down as well. So, and even they have some recovery at the beginning of 2024. It's of course mainly driven by the services part, with the recovery in tourism in Greece, Spain, and also in France. And the manufacturing sector is still struggling here. So, of course, the opposite, we can discuss the US case. Of course, they started their policy rate hike sooner, and they gain more stable GDP growth, and not they didn't sacrifice their economy as much as we observed in euro area, and we had seen it also in significant appreciation of dollar against the euro as well. Of course, this is a part of our story. We don't want to say that this is the extract for what we identified here. Of course, the one what we want to highlight is the credibility loss and in inflation expectations changes. So the main point today is the credibility loss, what we want to identify in their inflation expectations. So this is the survey-based inflation expectations. So I just put the dashed non-traded sticky price inflation here to see the high correlation between the 1 year and 3 year ahead survey-based inflation expectations, and to say that it's a very good indicator that we can see. But what I want to highlight here is the end of period unchanged line for the 1 year and 3 year ahead in inflation expectations, because it means that even the headline and core had their decreasing path for last year's. I'm sorry for the noise. The uncertainty is still clear in the market, and we can observe here the unchanged path, which is much higher than the average. It's higher than target, but we must think about the average during last years, and we can easily see that it's much higher than is it. And the what about the long-term inflation expectations? I put here Europe swap break-even 10 years, which can give us a nice feeling what's going on market expectations for upcoming 10 years. You can see also that the anchoring is real here. So even in short term, we can say that yes, it's coming from this part of the energy prices, bottleneck side. I don't know. We can cover this part, but in 10 years thinking, we can see that behavioral changes is here. I want to emphasize here that beforehand the market expectations was below, which means that the downward path expectations, which means that the economic recovery is going to be slower than the potential, for example. But in this case, when you can see these fluctuations on the market, it also a sign that credibility for ECB is damaged as well, because we can check for the US, and we checked it yesterday with Doug. We can see that even their sticky prices are well above now than their average or their target. Their expectations for 10-year break even is still close to their target and their average. But here we can see the obvious rise. So of course, this could be a sign that of course the credibility is loose, and they sacrifice their economic growth. But on the other hand, I know especially that our colleague Vasgen is one of that thinking that maybe we understood the economic growth of euro area, maybe the potential is below the estimated rates, what we think, and maybe the economy is good enough. So, and the sign for this is, of course, the unemployment rate, which is below the higher and still giving a signs of hot economic conditions and hot labor market. Of course, it can be a lagged effect, because we know that the lagged effect is a very real factor for the labor market in Euro area, because the persistency in their jobs and vacancies, I don't know, but let me also say that yes, wage growth is also still high, which is also an additional sign that the labor market is hot, and maybe it's coming from the positive output gap that we can say in other case. So this is briefly what I wanted to share with you as an additional part. So if you may have some questions, you are welcome. So
Thanks, Diana. Maybe a small question to begin. Do you have any calculations for the? I saw also the figures, the numbers for the year-on-year sticky price inflation. Do you have any numbers for a momentum, like month-on-month or 3 month over 3 month?
Over 3 month annualized data. I just skip that part because last time we discussed it. So 3 month over 3 month is more about the short-term and momentum changes in the economy. So we need to put our fingers on the any evolution and changes in this part as well, because year on year is of course more, and it's about the cycles and trends. But we also observe the 3 month over 3 month annualized data. Just let me say that for July, I couldn't have the whole data to update my 3 month over 3 month, but my feeling is that it will be momentum change here, because these services parts increase as well for July.
Okay, thanks. So this shows absolutely different picture from the one we saw on year over year. So it also shows that I think they are not how to say, like, they haven't come over the problem of inflation yet, I think, because what my concern over the euro area's economy is that basically, like, most of the people who looks at the GDP numbers of, for example, of the euro area, so the GDP growth is like close to zero, I don't know, 0. Something, or 0.2, 0.3, or in some quarters like close to 1, but basically like over the couple of years, they are very low. So they come up. So basically what they think is that they are in a negative output gap territory. But I think that might be confusing in some sense, because if you look at their labor market, at the inflation figures, maybe so the FPAS Mark II can help us also here, because on the other side, if we think that what if, for example, because after the Russian-Ukrainian war, they are in an absolutely different situation, because they were kind of in a very favorable situation when they were like importing fuel, like energy resources from Russia in a very favorable conditions, and they were exporting like too much to the rest of the world. But this economic model is in a transition period now, and maybe so over the last couple of years, or looking ahead, maybe for example during also in couple of years ahead, maybe they will have to, so their potential GDP may be even decreasing, for example, I don't know, or they are like long-term economic growth is close to zero or even negative for upcoming some years and so on. So we have to look at the broad picture of the economy, not only on the GDP growth number, and come to a conclusion that the economy is very weak and the demand is very low. So the Central Bank of Europe or the ECB has to start to policy loosening to not to kill the economy. So maybe that's a different scenario, and about the uncertainty about the current economic conditions and so on. So if you have any other questions, Ioannis, or your opinion.
Thank you for comment. I fully understand it, and I share it. Of course, it can be case A and case B for us, and when we thinking like this, what if the economy is hot, and maybe their policy rate even not enough because they couldn't bring the inflation to the target. And on the other case, if they sacrifice their economy because of higher policy rates, that it was necessary because they delayed their policy actions, this is the other part, and we will see the killing part of the labor market after some lag, and of course it will disinflate the economy as well, and of course it will make the GDP growth even slower, and of course the path for the anchoring and below target inflation is still in our future. So it could be our case A and case B for Euro area. And
thanks. Any other comments or questions?
Maybe a quick one. Of course, if you look back, right, at the history of the ECB, until the pandemic and the latest surge in inflation, the ECB, I think also you showed this, Dan, in your chart, consistently underperformed its target, right?
yeah.
Inflation was always not insignificantly below target forever, essentially, almost since the inception of the ECB. No, that was the criticism, essentially, that the ECB policy may have been too tight, right? I mean, if your inflation is always below target. Now, I would be a bit hesitant to, at least in the current situation, in the current context, to think that the economy, I mean that it's below, that the unemployment rate, for example, is below the Nairo. I have questions about the Nairo. Just, you don't show it in your chart, but I would imagine that since headline inflation is close to zero, and the sticky price inflation is well above 2%, the flexible price inflation must be negative, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine, just from looking at this. Now, if I remember correctly, the original Fed papers that rationalized this decomposition into sticky and flexible price inflation, the way they would present it is that the sticky price inflation reflects more accurately expectations, this part of the Phillips curve, expected inflation, but we should pay some attention to the flexible price inflation also, in the sense that it at least based on their empirical work that they had done, it correlates with the business cycle, this near-term business cycle better. So the fact that now it's significantly negative it casts doubt as to whether there is. It could argue that there could be more slack than we would imagine, than the Nairo estimate would suggest.
Yeah.
In terms of using this decomposition to guide monetary policy, you can say yes, inflation expectations may be higher than what the target is, but at the same time, the weakness in the real economy could argue for essentially tolerating higher inflation for a bit longer, maybe for a year longer, not aim to get to 2% within a year, say. I don't know what the frequency of the cycle is going to turn out. How would you assess, I mean, in making a policy recommendation, would you only look at the sticky prices, or would you try to dig into whether there is more evidence for economic weakness that could justify a slower approach towards the target?
Yeah, thank you for a very nice question, because maybe I skip that part. I'm sorry. So I just wanted to say that we are not model says or this indicator says, guys. We never say that this is a panacea and this is the only true way that we want to monitor. Even this case, I think that during these days, flexible prices can be something that the head can like this burn out the economy, because if they start to accelerate second times, or this may be also third time after the COVID, no one can say what it could how it can affect on the market expectations, uncertainties, non-linearities as well. That's why we don't never skip any part of the economic conditions. But even if the flexible prices started to rise, I will go to check what would happen with the market expectations, and I would immediately go to the sticky prices to see what's going on with the behavioral changes, because this is my fear that maybe that could come the word that I can't control it. That's why we never throw out anything from the basket, even these changes on the oil market, which is out of basket. We monitor everything every day. But the only part what I wanted to say, that this is the only indicator that can give us this sign what's going on with the behavior, excess demand pressures, or the market expectations. So of course we don't want to throw anything out, and we check everything any day.
Yeah, I also agree with Johannes's point that, yeah, we have to also look at the flexible prices, which may in some sense reflect the current recent developments like better, maybe in some sense, and that the economic cycle and so on. But what makes me fear of the current developments is the reacceleration of the non-traded sticky price inflation, because we see some deceleration in the sticky price inflation, but recently we see some reacceleration, which also what is more, I think what is more interesting and important in the sticky price in the sticky prices concept is that they don't reflect the maybe transitory or short-term demand conditions in the economy, but rather more long-term developments or expectations about the permanent developments in the economy. And if we see some reacceleration in the sticky prices inflations, I think in some sense it makes me fear about the current conditions of the economy.
Yeah, sure. It makes us feel fear as well, because we get hit, and it's mainly driven by these services prices, which can give us Of course, it's coming from the uncertainty in the markets, because as I saw from the survey-based expectations, the last part of the lines are unchanged. It means that market waits. They are waiting for something to happen. And of course, it can affect on the momentum change on these sticky prices, which we can see. And I think that we would see it even after July numbers come up, and I can update it.
Okay. Any other comments?
And the second question that I think we touched upon is just a reminder that we may need to look into that as well. Is essentially there is a very, if I understood the definitions of how you calculated non-traded versus, I mean, sticky versus flexible prices, corresponds to a very large extent of distinction between traded and non-traded goods. I mean, there is a big overlap there. And I mean, the point I had raised the other day was that you could have deviations between traded and non-traded good prices that are very fundamentally driven. In a sense, the ratio of traded to non-traded goods is the real exchange rate. So there could be reasons for why the real exchange rate may need to change in either direction. That's driven by fundamentals. So an inflation targeting central bank like the ECB may need to tolerate or to allow essentially non-traded prices to deviate on the upside, if in fact this reflects justifiable real exchange rate changes that need to take place. So that's, I think, an additional element that needs to go to understand what may be driving the real exchange rate that could justify deviations from non-traded goods prices from the inflation target, right? Because of a needed adjustment in the real exchange rate. That's a reminder that I think one needs to look at that dimension as well, to try to even if one expects the real exchange rate in an economy like the EU to be essentially stationary, to not to have long-term trends in the equilibrium real exchange rate. You could have deviations, needed near-term adjustments that can be perfectly justified and should be allowed in a sense.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, I think we need some deep analysis here, but just let me say that if the traded part is driven from the real exchange rate appreciation or depreciation in that case, of course, according to the relative prices, we must see some changes in non-traded prices as well. But it was be true if we had seen some lags just after the traded prices increase, and after that, after some lag because of relative prices, we must see the smoother increase, for example, for the non-traded ones. But this is, for example, a COVID example. This is a nice example that we had seen a different case, and it's perfectly elaborated with market expectations, acceleration. So of course we will check that case as well, that the relative price is the main driver for the non-traded sticky prices. But I think I did that example for Armenia crisis, and somehow they overlap. Maybe this story come up from this part, but it was the different cases that it contains more insights about the excess demand pressures and also about the market expectations. So if I could cover it, what you said, I think.
No, mine was a more general point. I think you make a good case for the current case. Why? Because I mean the non-traded sticky price index that you're following correlates very well also with current market expectations. So for overall inflation, so it makes a lot of sense. So it was a more general looking for going forward. You may need to look at the real exchange rate part carefully. I think the assessment, your assessment is, at least to me, is very convincing for the current context.
Okay, thank you. We will go deeper.
Okay, thanks, Diana, for a very good presentation. So thank you all, colleagues. Thanks, Yanni, for once more for attending and making it much more interesting, this discussion. So we are just on time. So
thank you. Actually, also let me say it's also extremely interesting for me. I learn a lot from these presentations. This is really very good work that you guys are doing.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you all. So see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. See you.